Hello everyone, I'm bringing you another recommended reading video today. We have had a recommended reading video recently. As I mentioned in that video, I've been going through my books, and this is another title I picked out which I thought was worth having a look at. It's Flying Clothing, the story of its development, and it's quite a good reference book if you're interested in flying clothing generally. It does deal with British flying clothing, it deals with other countries' flying clothing as well, and obviously the story, the history of the development of flying clothing. There's some interesting illustrations, some good photographs, and obviously the text has a lot of information in it as well. So we're going to have a look at this in a bit of detail now, obviously have a flick through, and you can see if this is something you might be interested in adding to your library of reference books. So here we have it, Flying Clothing, the story of its development by Louise Greer and Anthony Harold. Now this is a somewhat dated reference. It was first published in 1979. So first of all, it sort of covers up to that period, from the sort of inception of flying clothing and flight up to that period, circa 1979. And as I say, it's a somewhat dated reference, but it does contain a lot of interesting information, and these can be had for around £10, between £10 and £15, and well worth that money, I would say. So I'd say the colour illustrations, including the cover illustration, are not the strong point of this book by any means. They're a little bit lacking in detail, but there is nevertheless a lot of other information here, both illustrations and photographs. Of course, the text. We'll focus on the illustrations and the photographs in the video, of course. I'm going to try and be a little bit more brief with this than we were with the previous recommended reading. I really sort of flipped through the entire book in that video. I got a little bit carried away. So I'll try and be a little bit more brief here, but nevertheless give you a taste of what's in this and whether it might be useful for you as a reference. So flick through to the contents here. We can see here chapter 1, A Dream Come True. So this is pre-1914. You then have the developments of the Great War, the interwar years, and obviously fighter and bomber crew. It's separated out there for the Second World War, 1945 onward, and then we have some further details in the appendices. Quite useful, which we'll have a look at quickly at the end, is RAF source code for flying clothing, which is quite interesting. I think that information is available online, but it's nevertheless nice that they included this in this book. So we'll start with some of the earliest elements here, and obviously we have sort of heavier than air flight, some details on obviously early balloon flights here and so forth, and then moving into heavier than air flight, we have some early sort of adapted clothing here, which was just existing clothing, motorcar clothing and so forth, which was designed for use with early motorcars, of course, which were open top and didn't have windscreens and so forth, generally speaking. So some information included in there on that. Mostly civilian items, of course, at this point, pre-1914. The use of aircraft in the military was very limited, right up to the years just before the First World War, when you see a development of reconnaissance aircraft and so forth. And then from there, obviously, aerial combat became a thing during the Great War, and there's quite a lot of information in here dealing with Great War developments in flying kits. So quick flick through the preceding elements of flying clothing here. As you can see, there are quite a lot of nicely reproduced photographs in this, dealing with very early developments. Then we move through to the Great War, various, again, photographs here showing the development of protective masks, helmets and so forth. You see through here those photographs reproduced in some detail, some illustrations as well. There are some nicely reproduced catalogue pages as well. Quite a nice reproduced cartoon there. And if we flick through, interesting early oxygen mask there. So you can see the sort of level of detail here in the photographs which are reproduced. Some of the illustrations, as mentioned, you see here of the early Mark I flying helmet there. Quite a nice line illustration of that, showing the details of construction and so forth. And we'll get on to the interwar section. So we're into the interwar section now, and I think it's somewhere in here that you get a sort of catalogue page of flying clothing. Again, more illustrations of designs of boots there. So interwar flying suits, you can see there. One early war flying suits be covered in this section as well. Again, early breathing apparatus with the helmets and goggles there, as you can see. And some reproduced sort of diagrams and illustrations, which have been obviously from earlier publication reproduced in the book as well, which is quite nice to see. And flicking through, trying to remember where the catalogue pages are, because they are particularly interesting. In each section, and there are colour illustrations, but these aren't particularly detailed, unfortunately, but they give an idea of sort of the colour of the cloth used and so forth, I suppose you could say, and combined with the photographs, they make for a useful reference. Flick through a little bit further here. Here we go, we're seeing some of the catalogue pages here. So we have the GQ Parasuit, which is quite an interesting design, obviously covered in more detail in the text. And then we move into the Second War here, further illustrations. This is all fighter clothing, generally speaking, clothing for fighter pilots. There was some overlap, of course, but some things were specifically designed for bomber crews, of course, so that's covered in some detail. And some colour illustrations here, looking at the post-war era as well. The colour plates tend to be included on certain pages spread throughout the book, so you'll find there's a little bit of a mix-up in dates and so forth there. Flicking through, I should have made a note of where the catalogue page was that I was looking for. We might flick back to that if I can find it towards the end. Moving through to Bomber Crew here, and again, lots of photographs, information presented in here. Again, nicely reproduced photographs. We'll flick on a bit further. Here we go. This is one of the pages I was looking for. This isn't necessarily from a catalogue, but you can see here well-dressed aircrew, and this gives you various different patterns of flying boot. This is British kit here. Of course, this book is not purely concerned with British flying clothing, but it does feature heavily throughout the book. Different patterns of gloves, different patterns of gloves and mitts and so forth, different patterns of, well, you've got a flying helmet here, and then obviously a method of wearing the headset from that using basically a set that they clip into to wear them as a set of headphones, and the mask which clips onto that, which could also clip onto the flying helmet, different patterns of goggles and so forth. Nicely reproduced there. Flicking through further, get to the end of the Second World War and into the jet age. So where are we up to here? Press right, here we go. So supersonic, so we're moving into the post-war years here, obviously, and you have not only flying clothing, have some interesting elements of stewardess's uniform here from civil aviation as well, covered. Obviously specialised clothing for the high-flying and high-speed aircraft of the 1960s, well, later 1950s and 1960s. Nice diagram here of a Lightning Cruise kit. Quite nicely reproduced. Actually gives details of the ejection seat there as well, which is quite interesting. And Phantom Cruise kit as well, which is again quite nicely reproduced, summer and winter. And these are scaled down from the original, but they are nevertheless legible and provide quite a lot of information. We'll just flick through here to the appendices, further illustrations here as well of post-war flying helmets, boots, so forth. We'll flick through to the appendices here. Appendix 1 deals with RAF flying clothing, and specifically the 22C codes, which give you, say, if you find something with the 22C code on it, will give you the actual official nomenclature in the appendix here, which is quite useful. So again, if you want to have a look at this, you can pause here, but worth having the book. It does include this information as well, which is quite useful. And we'll flick through all of those pages through to there. So Appendix 2 deals with notes on the conservation of flying clothing, and Appendix 3 gives you the sort of altitude where different levels of protection are required, which is quite interesting as well. So bibliography and so forth at the end as well. So hopefully having that quick flick through, I've tried to keep this a little bit more brief this time, although I can see on the camera we've run to over 8 minutes. Hopefully looking through this gives you an idea of the contents of the book, whether it be useful to you. I've certainly found it a very interesting read. Flying clothing is not an area I really collect to any great extent. I did have a little bit of post-war flying clothing for a while, but sold off most of that. I think I still have the helmet and the mask. So yeah, that's about the limit of my flying clothing that I have. It might be something I'll get back into in the future, who knows. Anyway, hopefully this video has been useful, and hopefully it's been useful looking through this book. So I hope you found it interesting looking at this.
Obviously, it's a reference book dealing with different countries' flying clothing and the development thereof, so it's not as in-depth as a specific reference dealing with, say, just British flying clothing, for example. But nevertheless, it is an interesting reference piece, and it does cover quite a lot of ground. And from that point of view, I think it's a good book to have in your library if you're interested in Air Forces and Air Force flying clothing. If you have found this interesting and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as I always say, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address in the description as well. That's everything for this video, so until next time, bye for now.